Welcome back to the channel. I'm Ruben, and on today's episode we're going to be pulling the motor out on the GT. It's going to be a little bit different today, less entertaining and more instructional. So the main goal of this video is to make a how-to on how to pull the twin turbo motor out of a Subaru Legacy. Now this basically applies to both the second gen and the third gen, but there's a couple of other reasons. Obviously I'm not doing this for just making the video. We've got rocker cover gaskets to do, we've got rear main seal and kidney plate or air oil separator plate. The second gens here, they come with the plastic style one, no good, so we'll be replacing that. There's a couple of other little tidy up things as well. I just generally want to tidy up the engine bay, try and remove rusty parts and either replace them with non-rusty ones or repaint them. You know, maybe sandblast the heat shields or replace them, stuff like that. So basically it's just a big old tidy up of the engine bay and knocking off a couple of oil leaks as well. It's a good opportunity for us to inspect the engine, the turbos, timing as well. So many reasons to do this. So sit back and enjoy. I hope this video helps a lot of people pulling their twin turbo motors out, and I hope those who aren't, you enjoy the struggle. Cheers. So here's a quick look at the tools I'll be using today. The star of the show, undoubtedly, is the Weeble Wobble 14mm socket. And the co-stars are the ratcheting ring 14, 12 and 10mm. If you don't have those in your toolkit and you're attempting this job, I strongly recommend you pick them up before. It just makes things so much easier. Well, let's get to it. Once your vehicle is jacked up and the bonnet placed in the service position, you can drain your coolant with the drain bung to avoid making a mess. All of the twin turbo vacuum lines can be removed using the plug system on the black box of death here. Remove the fork and then you unplug each plug separately. Each plug is connected to a different part of the engine, so plug number 1 for example is for the intercooler. Removing the intercooler can seem daunting at first, but with the proper technique it's actually quite easy. Loosen the throttle body hose clamp and then loosen the clamps at each turbo at the turbo end, not the intercooler end. The secondary side, as was just pictured, was easily accessible from above, but the primary side here you need a long extension and have to sort of reach in blind down past the fuel filter and turbo. In addition to disconnecting plug number 1, you also need to unhook line 22 from the intercooler and disconnect line 21 from the intercooler to the differential pressure sensor. Once all your hoses are undone, you can pull the intercooler from the back to remove it. And then you can go back to disconnect any hoses you forgot to disconnect. Next, you can remove the airbox as a complete assembly, unbolting the two 12mm at the bottom and then removing it all as one unit. Remove the multiple components of the airbox assembly as you fail to remove it as a complete unit. Disconnect the engine harness connector here and remove the two 10mm bolts that hold the power steering lines to the head, taking care not to drop the bolts. Next, we will be disconnecting the throttle cable and cruise control cable if fitted. Use a bungee cord or zip tie to hold the radiator hose and power steering hose out the way for radiator removal. If your car is a manual, you may leave this reservoir attached to the radiator for removal. If it is an auto, you will need to remove it to gain access to the transmission cooler lines. Third gens also don't need to remove the reservoir as the transmission cooler lines are accessed from below the radiator. Spark plugs make a perfect bung for the trans-cooler lines. Remove the radiator with radiator fans still attached. My preferred method of pulling engines is to remove the accessories off the engine without cracking them open, so you do not need to regas the aircon or bleed the power steering. The factory service manual suggests that you disconnect the aircon lines and you also disconnect the hydraulic lines off the power steering pump. This is a waste of time. Unfortunately for second gen turbos, thanks to the power steering cooler, the power steering pump will only swing aside if you place it upside down, and it will leak fluid out of the cap. Keep this in mind when you're putting the car back together, and always check and top up your fluid once you've done so. When you also fling it out to the side, put a rag underneath it. To remove the aircon compressor, by far the easiest method is to undo the 410mm that attach the bracket to the block. However, if you do not have the 14mm Weeble Wobble socket, you can disconnect the compressor from the bracket by removing the 4 12mm through bolts. For second gens, remove the charcoal canister to make room for the engine to come out later on. When disconnecting line 10 and 23 here, leave one joiner on the engine side and one on the body side to prevent mixing them up as you put the engine back together. Disconnect the main engine harness to bulkhead harness connectors here, but also the O2 sensor. We will want to remove the O2 sensor for engine removal. Removing the intercooler bracket here disconnects the engine ground, as well as giving you better access to the heat shield bolts and downpipe bolts. Next, disconnect the brake booster line as well as the fuel lines. Now we are up to the best part of removing a twin turbo engine, the heat shields and downpipe bolts. This is where the 10mm ratcheting ring spanner really shines and helps you get at quite a few of the bolts. You'll also want a good 1/4 inch set with both a short extension and short socket. So for the secondary heat shield, there's 2 on top and 2 on the side down by the rail. And then for the lower heat shield, There's one accessed from the top, one on the side here accessed from the top, and then there's this one accessed down on the bottom, and this one on the back also accessed down from the bottom. For the primary heat shield for the lower one, we've got two on the side here by the rail, and just one on the bottom here accessed from underneath. And for the upper heat shield, there's two on the bottom. You can access both of these from underneath, one on the top and two on the side here. Use your long spanner to break loose the 410mm downpipe bolts. Use your 1/2" breaker bar to break loose the downpipe bolts. Use your long spanner to break loose the 410mm downpipe bolts. Use your 1/2" breaker bar that can go past 90 degrees to break loose the downpipe bolts. Use your Weeble Wobble 14mm and a long ratchet to break loose the lower downpipe bolts on the primary side. I intentionally edited this to bring home the point of just how painful this part of the job is. Now we can finally move on to the heater core lines and the pitch stay. Oh my. No wonder you were having starting problems. There's a little relay put in here for the starter motor. If you just tightened the main starter ground, you would have been fine. Oh my god. The lower starter nut's loose as well. Now we can disconnect the 14mm bolt from the back of the starter motor. If you have an automatic, you may leave the starter motor in place. If you have a manual, you will need to remove the starter motor to gain access to the clutch pivot pin. This is where auto and manual diverge. For the automatic, we will remove the 4 12mm bolts here to the torque converter through the access hole. For manual, you will need to use a 10mm in-hex / Allen key to remove the cap that covers up the clutch pivot pin. Then you can wind a 10mm bolt into the pivot pin to remove the pivot pin. Next, remove the O2 sensor. These are positioned in such a way that they will strike the chassis rail as you pull the engine out, so it is just easier to remove it and not have the heartache of having to replace it. These from Subaru are still very expensive, and universal 3 wires often do not work. If using penetrant to help you remove it, be very light on the usage. Do not get any penetrant into the back of the sensor or into the front of the sensor. Also, do not drop onto concrete as they are very sensitive to shock. Next, remove the engine mount nuts and lower bell housing nuts. Next, remove all the bolts that secure the downpipe to the transmission. And here we can see the advantage of replacing these exhaust bolts when you encounter them. I replaced these when I did the fuel tank, well worth it. Now disconnect the catalytic converter temperature probe plug, ensuring not to rip the pins out the back of the housing. And same again for the primary downpipe cat temp probe. Don't forget to unwrap the little wire tie around the cat temp probe wire here. Here I am jacking underneath the transmission to help lift it off the crossmember. This is where we place the accessories to the side to allow the engine to come out, and we find out also why Subaru recommends to disconnect the hoses. This does put a bit of pain on the aircon line, so try to find a position that allows the hose not to twist too tightly. Also place a rag underneath the power steering pump to catch the oil that's going to leak out the lid. And finally we can attach the engine crane. Make sure you use the right length bolts here to get good engagement with the thread. So there you have it, how to remove a twin turbo engine. As you can see, it's not a whole lot different to removing a single turbo. It's just those extra downpipe bolts basically, and dealing with the twin turbo intercooler. Hopefully you guys watching, if you're planning to do this, picked up a few little helpful tips along the way. It's always nice, you know, seeing how someone else does it, just picking up what they do. In the next episode we will be doing the rocker cover gaskets and the air oil separator plate, and we'll tidy up the engine bay as well. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers!